Hey everybody, it's Never. Why is raiding hard? See, raiding is the pinnacle of player versus environment challenge in World of Warcraft, and it's meant to be a big deal when players finally beat the end boss for the first time. And yet it's taken less and less time for this to happen. Has raiding gotten easier? In Vanilla, it took players 154 days to kill Ragnaros for the first time, and in Legion, it took only 16 days to kill Argus the Unmaker, who is a much bigger deal. And so why are we clearing raids almost 10 times faster today than we were in Vanilla? I once heard it put that raiding hasn't gotten easier, it's just gotten easier to raid. And this made a lot of sense to me. You just have to look at the boss fight mechanics. In Molten Core and Vanilla WoW, most bosses had only like 2 to 3 mechanics, and strategies largely revolved around positioning the raid. Boss fights today are a lot more complex. For example, if you look at the Fat Boss guide for Mythic Imperator Margok, the Heroic guide is 16 minutes long, and the Mythic guide just adds 38 minutes to that, just to explain the mechanics of the boss fight. And so boss fights, if they've gotten harder, then what has gotten easier about raiding? Because it has gotten easier, hasn't it? Well, so here's a couple of things to think about. One thing is consumables. If you look at the recommended preparations for Molten Core, I have a list here. You have class spell reagents, bandages, healing potions, mana potions, food, tubers, since those don't share a potion cooldown, flasks, blasted land buffs, Fellwood consumables, Winterspring jujus, weapon buffs, and fire protection potions, if you don't have enough fire resist on your gear. Every raid member was expected to have most or all of these things, and acquiring them was very expensive and time consuming. And I can remember hearing people talk about how they simply couldn't afford a raid because they didn't have time to farm materials or gold to pay for their consumables. And then there was the cost of respecs. Unless you were one of the few people that were fortunate enough to be able to solo outdoor mobs in your questing or in your raiding spec, you had to switch to a questing spec. And the people that this hit the most was like healers and tanks and anyone who wanted to do serious PvP. They had to go pay gold to change to a spec they could go and quest and solo in, and then they had to pay more gold to change back on raid night, and sometimes, like tanks especially, would have to change their spec just for one boss to another. And so all the potions and foods and flasks and everything was a requirement for serious raiding. And this isn't so bad today. It's improved a lot over time. So like today, for raid night, you need like a stack of 2 of potions and like a stack or 2 of food and some runes, and maybe a couple other little things, but it's not a big deal. I mean, it's not super cheap now, but it's definitely not nearly as hard as it used to be. Oh, and respeccing's free now, so there's that. But even though you had all your stuff together back in the day, raiding is about the raid. And the worst and most difficult thing about World of Warcraft is other people, and raids are full of other people. And so one of the biggest things that was difficult about classic raiding was getting 40 people online at a time and ready to go all at once. And in today's model of flexible raiding or 20-player mythic raids, it makes like 40-man raiding look like herding cats. It's just nobody even wants to do it because it's such a hassle. I guess some people want to do it, some people want to do it, but not me. Except for like once every year when they do one of those anniversary things. But this part of it alone, just getting everyone together, that was enough to make raiding impossible for some people that would otherwise be very capable and successful raiders, because they just didn't have the time or the scheduling availability to do it. And so even when you get 40 people together and ready and all online at the same time, then there's the whole matter of executing the actual boss fight correctly. When there's so many moving parts with 40 people, and people didn't even know what they were doing yet playing the game, which is the next point, is that we've gotten way better at raiding. We've gotten better at the whole game. Back in the day, even just basic class rotations, if they existed at all, they were a challenge for a lot of people, because most people just pushed their highest damaging ability whenever it came off a cooldown. But in our modern world of Warcraft, we've got online guides and videos and databases for everything that the game has the same day that it comes out. But back in the early days, everyone was just still kind of figuring it out. You had a lot of speculation going around of what people thought was a good idea, and everyone argued whether or not whether this build was good or that build was good, and nobody could really prove it one way or another yet. There were some cases where they could, but a lot of times it was just whatever people could make up, and whoever was successful, it was accepted that that was that was the best, even though it just worked for that guy. So it still doesn't paint the whole picture, because just because people are skilled now, it just means that Blizzard can make much more complicated and difficult boss fights. But obviously they're not more complicated and difficult, or are they? Because raiding's gotten easier, hasn't it? Or at least we're killing bosses faster. And so the thing is, even skilled players with all the right preparations and everything, they still needed to be powerful enough to actually compete with the bosses and to progressively handle harder and harder bosses. They had to be geared in order to even raid. So in Molten Core, all 40 players of the raid, generally, they had to be geared, and they had to share 2 pieces of gear per boss. So you down a boss, 2 pieces of gear drop for 40 people to fight over. And so that meant that if you cleared most of the raid every week, on average you would gear 1 person with you know, a good set of decent gear, you know, collectively 1 person. And that's if you didn't get like duplicates that you didn't need, that no one could use. And so not just that, but people actually already had to be geared even to get into Molten Core. So the level of investment for a single character was very high, and when people are that invested and they want the shiny new loot that drops, but the raid leader gives it to his girlfriend who's the worst healer, you just end up with a bunch of drama, and drama leads to guilds breaking up. And when guilds break up, then you lose people, and then that means you've lost the gear you invested in that person also. And so it can set you back weeks in your progression. Today, gear is very easy to get by comparison. Everybody is expected to be fully decked out in epic gear before they even step foot into normal mode raids. And everyone's much more likely to receive new and better gear, and so their power increases much faster. And so gear's a really big part of what makes it easier to raid today, but there's another side to this, and that's as the game has gone on, gear has become more and more powerful relatively, as well as easy to obtain. And so this is due to mainly 2 things. We're in a situation where most people are progressing in higher difficulty raids, or most people who are progressing in higher difficulty raids, they actually have equal or better gear when they start the raid than the raid itself provides. So let me say that again. When people step foot into Heroic Antorus, odds are they already have gear that's equal or better than the gear they would get from Heroic Antorus. And so the reason for this is first because of the abundance of sources of gear. So you've got like Mythic Plus, which scales up really, really high, and dungeons that, just dungeons in general, because you have gear that can randomly upgrade. You've got PvP gear, you've got World Quest, you've got crafting, and because all of this stuff can randomly upgrade, sometimes you get a very nice, powerful piece of gear. Usually you can count on 1 person having 1 exceptionally powerful piece of gear from this system, but still it does add up over time. And so the way that we can see how much gear is being wasted is we look at the enchanting. And so if you look at enchant weapon spell power, it needs 4 large brilliant shards, and that was a major enchanting reagent back in the day. Compared to, that was for vanilla, but compared to Enchant Neck Mark of the Satyr, which is a go-to in Legion, that needs 12 Chaos Crystals at max rank. That's with it already reduced from the extra ranks. And so you need 3 times as many of the main enchanting ingredient today as you did back in the day, which tells me that a whole lot more gear is being disenchanted now, because people are just getting loads more gear than they used to. And I mean, this is true for me because I probably disenchant like 95% of the gear I get all throughout Legion because it's just not an upgrade. Because even if I'm going and doing content that is appropriate for where my character is, I already outgear it. And that's the case for most players. The other part of this is something called split rating. You've probably heard about this, and here's what it is in case you don't know. So split rating is like warping space-time for World of Warcraft. And it works like this. So let's say you've got 20 people in a mythic raiding group, they each have main characters that can run the raid once per week to get gear. So what you do is everyone in that group of 20 people makes an alt. And so everyone's got a main and an alt. And what they do is, after they clear it for the first time for their mains, they then go and clear it again, but they do half mains for, 10 of the people bring their mains, 10 people bring their alts. And so as they run through the raid that time, all of the people that are on their alts, they don't take the gear. They just give it to the people that are on their mains. Even though those people have already gotten gear, they can get it again because they're being given it from somebody else on their alt. And then they switch. So the people that ran their mains now run their alts, the people that ran their alts now run their mains, and they go through it again, and they gear the other half of the mains up the same way. So what you end up with is these people, because of these alts, they ran the raid twice this week. They get the twice as many chances at loot as if they were, as opposed to just running the raid with their mains. And what if everybody made a second alt or a third alt? And so because the loot lockouts are per boss, per character, instead of how it used to be where it was per character, per lockout, you can compress like a month of raiding into a single week when it comes to attempts on the boss and chances at gear. And you just need to run the raid over and over again. And so that is why raids are cleared 10 times faster today. It's because it's gotten easier to raid, socially, economically easier, but it's also because high-end guilds can literally compress time to raid faster and get loot more often. And so why are raids hard? That was our original question. Well, they're hard because they have to be. Because we as players have gotten so good at the game that we defy petty things like space-time to get ahead, and because we've mapped out every detail of the world of Warcraft for everyone's perusal. We've got all the information everywhere. The game is figured out to the tiniest detail. So because things like flexible raid and personal loot have almost eliminated the biggest social hurdles. And so you put all that together, raids are hard because that's what makes them fun, even though it doesn't make them more difficult or more time consuming. And so it's gotten easier to raid, but the raids have already also gotten harder. And the reason that it's gotten easier to raid, even though the raids have gotten harder, is because that gets you to the fun part sooner. And so why is it easy to raid? Because it makes, or why are raids hard, but it's easier to raid? It's because it makes it more fun. And you spend more time doing the fun part and less time doing all of the nonsense that fits in between it. This is my opinion, this is how I see it, and understanding this has made me enjoy the game in general quite a bit more. It's made me understand why sometimes things don't seem like they're the way they should be, or why Blizzard makes certain decisions that at first seem kind of sucky, but in practice, after I understand it, make a whole lot of sense, because really that's the only way it can be. If I see problems in World of Warcraft, it almost always comes down to one of three things. Number one is toxic people, and I don't know what the answer to that is. I really don't. If there is an answer to it, I hope we find it soon, because it's the worst part about playing any game online, World of Warcraft especially. The other thing is that players just get good at games. We get really good at them, and then there's the impossible conundrum of, do you make the game hard enough for the people that have been playing it for a long time, or for the people that are just naturally skilled gamers, or do you make it easy enough so that it's approachable by everyone? Where's the balance? That's the other hard part. And then finally, the last one is, we get tired of stuff. We get used to it, and there can only be so much newness in a game before you've done it. And you've done all of it, and you put all that stuff together, and it can burn people out. And that's why, usually for like the 3 or 4 months leading up to a new expansion, I hardly play at all. Because by the time the expansion comes out, I want it to be new. I want it to be fresh again, and I want to have that itch to play World of Warcraft, so that I can scratch it hard when we get into all the new content. So that's why raids are hard, is because it makes it fun. But it's also because that's the way that Blizzard can keep up with an ever-evolving player base. Thanks for watching. I hope this was interesting to you. If you like this format of video, please let me know. If you hate it, well, then let me know that too. Okay, thanks, bye.